The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dry, cracked earth of the sprawling ranch. The air was thick with the scent of dust and hay, mingling with the faint aroma of wild flowers that somehow managed to bloom despite the harsh conditions. A man stood by the fence, his boots caked with dirt, his hat pulled low over his face. His name was Jack, and he had spent most of his life on this land, working tirelessly to keep it running. But now, as he stared out at the horizon, there was no joy in his eyes, only a deep, unshakable sadness. Jack's wife, Mary, had passed away a year ago, leaving him alone to manage the ranch. Her absence was like a gaping hole in his chest, one that no amount of work or whiskey could fill. He threw himself into the daily grind, waking before sunrise to check on the cattle, mend fences, and tend to the horses. By the time the sun set, he was too tired to think about anything but sleep. And yet, even in his exhaustion, he couldn't escape the memories of her laughter, her voice, the way she used to hum while cooking dinner in their modest kitchen. But lately, things had become harder. The house felt emptier than ever, and Jack found himself struggling to keep up with everything. Cooking meals was never his strong suit, and he often ended up eating cold sandwiches or canned beans for dinner. Cleaning was another chore he neglected entirely, leaving dishes piled high in the sink and dust gathering on every surface. He tried not to let it bother him, but the clutter reminded him of how much he missed having someone else around. The warmth of companionship, the sound of another person moving through the house. One day, while making a rare trip into town to pick up supplies, Jack spotted a flyer pinned to the bulletin board outside the general store. "Help wanted. Cook and housekeeper needed," it read. The words caught his attention immediately. It wasn't just the promise of hot meals that appealed to him. It was the idea of having someone else in the house, someone who might make it feel less like a tomb. He didn't want anyone getting too close, of course. He wasn't ready for that. All he needed was someone practical, someone who could handle the basics and stay out of his way. With a grunt, Jack tore the flyer from the board and stuffed it into his pocket. Back at the ranch, he posted the same ad online using the old computer in his office. He wasn't sure if anyone would respond. After all, who would want to live out here in the middle of nowhere? But within a few days, he received an email from a woman named Sarah. She explained that she and her young daughter, Lily, were looking for work after losing their home in the city. They had experience with cooking and cleaning, and they were willing to start right away. Jack hesitated. He hadn't considered children being part of the deal, and the thought of having a kid running around made him uneasy. Still, he needed help, and Sarah seemed desperate enough to take the job without asking too many questions. After exchanging a few more emails, he agreed to meet them the following week. The day Sarah and Lily arrived, the ranch looked particularly barren. The wind whipped across the open fields, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the distant sound of cattle lowing. Jack stood by the front porch, his arms crossed over his chest, watching as a beat-up sedan pulled into the driveway. The car sputtered to a stop and two figures stepped out, a woman in her early 30s and a little girl with pigtails and wide, curious eyes. Sarah introduced herself with a nervous smile, extending her hand. "Thank you for letting us come," she said, her voice soft but steady. Jack shook her hand briefly, his calloused fingers brushing against hers. Up close, he could see the weariness etched into her face, the dark circles under her eyes telling a story of struggle and resilience. Beside her, Lily clung to her mother's leg, peeking shyly at Jack. "This is Lily," Sarah added, gently urging the girl forward. "Say hello." "Hi," Lily whispered, barely audible over the rustling leaves. Jack nodded stiffly. "Welcome. I'll show you where you can stay." He led them inside, pointing out the small bedroom adjacent to the kitchen where they'd be sleeping. "You'll cook 3 meals a day," he explained, his tone clipped. "Clean up after yourself and keep the place tidy. That's all I need." Sarah nodded, taking in the surroundings. The house was simple but functional, with wooden floors and faded curtains. There was a certain charm to it, though it was clear that it hadn't been cared for in some time. Dust coated the furniture and the air smelled faintly of mildew. Still, Sarah didn't complain. She knew they were lucky to have found this opportunity. As Jack showed them around, he couldn't help but notice how different they were from what he'd expected. Sarah carried herself with quiet dignity, her movements deliberate and efficient. Despite her obvious fatigue, she radiated a kind of strength that intrigued him. And then there was Lily, whose bright eyes darted curiously around the room, taking in every detail. For a brief moment, Jack felt a pang of guilt for bringing them here, to this isolated place far from the comforts of the city. But he quickly pushed the thought aside. This arrangement was strictly business, nothing more. That evening, as Sarah unpacked their meager belongings, Jack retreated to the barn, needing space to process the sudden change in his routine. He leaned against a wooden beam, staring out at the fields bathed in golden light. The ranch had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in hard work and forget about the pain gnawing at his heart. But now, with Sarah and Lily in the picture, he wasn't sure what to expect. Would they disrupt the fragile balance he'd built for himself? Or would they bring something he hadn't realized he'd been missing? Back in the house, Sarah tucked Lily into bed, smoothing the blankets over her tiny frame. "Do you think we'll be okay here?" Lily asked sleepily, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "We'll be fine," Sarah reassured her, forcing a smile. "This is a new beginning for us. Just you wait and see." As she turned off the light and closed the door behind her, Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. She knew this job wouldn't be easy, and she had no illusions about the gruff man who owned the ranch. But for the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, this place would give them the fresh start they so desperately needed. The next morning, Sarah woke up before sunrise, determined to make a good impression. She tiptoed into the kitchen, careful not to wake Lily, and began preparing breakfast. The stove was old and stubborn, but after a few minutes of coaxing, it came to life with a soft hiss. She cracked eggs into a bowl, chopped vegetables, and fried bacon until the smell filled the house. It wasn't fancy, but it was hearty, a meal fit for someone who worked as hard as Jack did. When Jack entered the kitchen, he stopped short, surprised by the sight of a full breakfast laid out on the table. There were scrambled eggs, toast, and a plate of crispy bacon along with a pot of freshly brewed coffee. For a moment he just stood there, staring at the food as if unsure what to do with it. Then, clearing his throat, he muttered a gruff thanks and sat down. Sarah hovered nearby, unsure whether she should join him or leave him alone. "Is there anything else you'd like?" she asked hesitantly. Jack shook his head without looking up. "No, this is fine." He shoveled a forkful of eggs into his mouth, chewing slowly. The flavors were simple but satisfying, reminding him of meals Mary used to make. He pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the task ahead. "I'll be out checking the cattle," he said after finishing his plate. "You can clean up when you're done." With that, he grabbed his hat and headed outside, leaving Sarah standing in the doorway. She watched him go, feeling a mix of relief and unease. Jack was polite enough, but there was something distant about him, as though he were deliberately keeping her at arm's length. Still, she reminded herself that this was only their first day. Things would get better with time. Over the next few days, Sarah fell into a routine. She woke early to prepare breakfast, cleaned the house during the day, and cooked dinner in the evenings. Lily helped where she could, dusting shelves and folding laundry while chattering happily about everything she saw. The ranch fascinated her, the horses grazing in the fields, the chickens pecking at the ground, the endless expanse of open sky. She often begged Sarah to let her explore, but Sarah always insisted she stay close to the house. Jack continued to keep his distance, speaking only when necessary. He gave Sarah instructions about meals and chores, but beyond that, he avoided conversation. Despite his aloofness, Sarah couldn't help but notice small details about him. He had a habit of running his fingers along the brim of his hat when he was deep in thought. His hands were rough and calloused from years of manual labor. Yet they moved with surprising gentleness when he handled the animals, and sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, A flicker of sadness passed over his face. One afternoon, as Sarah scrubbed dishes in the sink, she heard a faint tapping sound coming from outside. Curious, she stepped onto the porch and spotted Lily sitting on the steps drawing pictures in the dirt with a stick. Nearby, Jack knelt beside one of the horses, inspecting its hoof. The animal snorted and shifted nervously, but Jack remained calm, murmuring soothing words as he worked. "Does your daddy take care of horses too?" Lily asked suddenly, startling Sarah. Sarah glanced at Jack, unsure how to respond. "No, sweetie, we don't have a horse where we lived before." Lily tilted her head, considering this. Why does he talk to them like that? "I think he's trying to calm them down," Sarah said softly. "Animals can get scared just like people." Lily nodded, seemingly satisfied with the explanation. She went back to her drawing, humming a tune under her breath. Sarah lingered on the porch, watching Jack as he finished examining the horse. He patted its neck affectionately before standing and brushing off his jeans. Their eyes met briefly, and for a moment Sarah felt a strange connection, a shared understanding that neither of them could quite put into words. As the days turned into weeks, subtle changes began to happen around the ranch. The house grew cleaner and more organized thanks to Sarah's efforts. Dishes were washed promptly, beds were made neatly, and the musty smell of neglect gradually disappeared. Even the kitchen took on a new life, with fresh herbs hanging too, dry near the window and the faint aroma of baked goods wafting through the air. Jack noticed these improvements, though he rarely commented on them. Instead, he found himself lingering longer during meals, savoring the flavors of Sarah's cooking. She had a knack for turning simple ingredients into delicious dishes: spicy chili on cold nights, golden brown biscuits slathered with butter, and pies bursting with ripe fruit. Each bite reminded him of happier times, of family dinners and laughter-filled evenings. One evening, as Sarah served dinner, Lily piped up with a question. "Why do you live here all by yourself, Mr. Jack?" Jack froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. He hadn't expected such a direct inquiry, especially from a child. Sarah shot her daughter a warning glance, but Jack waved it off. "It's okay," he said gruffly. Setting his fork down, he looked at Lily. "I used to live here, with my wife, but she isn't here anymore." Lily frowned, sensing the weight behind his words. "Where did she go?" "She died," Jack replied simply, his voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Sarah reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on Lily's shoulder. "I'm sorry," Lily said softly, her big eyes filled with sympathy. Jack nodded, swallowing hard. "Me too." After dinner, Sarah tucked Lily into bed, reading her a story until she drifted off to sleep. When she returned to the living room, she found Jack sitting by the fireplace, staring into the flames. Hesitating for a moment, she approached him cautiously. "She didn't mean to upset you," she said gently. "She's just curious." "I know," Jack replied, his gaze still fixed on the fire. "Kids are like that. They ask questions adults don't want to answer." Sarah sat down across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "Do you miss her a lot?" Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Every day. Losing her, it changed everything. I don't think I'll ever really get over it." There was a raw honesty in his voice that tugged at Sarah's heart. She understood loss all too well, the pain of saying goodbye to dreams and starting over with nothing. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I can't imagine how hard that must be." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Finally, Jack broke the silence. "You're doing a good job here," he said abruptly, almost as if the words had slipped out against his will. "The place looks better than it has in years." Sarah smiled faintly. "Thank you. I'm glad you approve." Jack grunted, leaning back in his chair. "Don't expect me to start singing your praises every day, though," Sarah chuckled softly. "I wouldn't dream of it." Despite his gruff demeanor, Jack couldn't deny that having Sarah and Lily around had made a difference. The house felt warmer somehow, less like a ghost town and more like a home. He told himself it was just the practical benefits, the meals, the cleaning, but deep down he knew there was more to it than that. There was something about Sarah's quiet strength, her ability to find beauty in small things, that drew him in. And Lily, with her endless curiosity and boundless energy, reminded him of what it meant to see the world through fresh eyes. Still, Jack resisted the pull. He wasn't ready to let anyone in, not yet. But as he sat there by the fire, listening, to the distant hoot of an owl and the rhythmic ticking of the clock, he allowed himself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to face the future entirely alone. The days grew shorter as autumn settled over the ranch, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. The mornings were crisp, with a thin layer of frost covering the ground, and the afternoons brought a gentle breeze that carried the scent of fallen leaves. Sarah had grown accustomed to the rhythm of life on the ranch, finding comfort in its predictability. Each morning, she rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, filling the house with the aroma of coffee and freshly baked bread. By midday, she tackled chores, sweeping floors, washing clothes, and tidying up the clutter Jack seemed determined to leave behind. And every evening, she cooked hearty meals that lingered in the air long after the dishes were cleared. Jack, too, had settled into a routine, though his was far more solitary. He spent most of his time outdoors, tending to the cattle, repairing fences, or checking on the horses. Yet, despite his efforts to keep busy, he found himself stealing glances at Sarah whenever she passed by. There was something about the way she moved with purpose and grace that caught his attention. She never complained, even when the work piled up or the stove refused to cooperate. Instead, she faced each challenge with quiet determination, her smile unwavering. One afternoon, as Sarah hung laundry on the line, Lily ran up to her, breathless with excitement. "Mommy, can we go see the horses again?" Sarah glanced toward the pasture where Jack was brushing down one of the mares. "Not now, sweetheart. Mr. Jack is working." "But he lets me pet them sometimes," Lily protested, her lower lip trembling. Sarah sighed, torn between indulging her daughter's curiosity and respecting Jack's space. "Maybe later," she said finally, ruffling Lily's hair. "Why don't you help me fold these towels instead?" Lily pouted but obeyed, dragging a stool over to assist. As they worked, Sarah couldn't help but notice Jack watching them from afar. He didn't wave or call out, but his gaze lingered longer than usual, as if he were studying them. When he finally turned back to the horse, Sarah felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her wonder if perhaps he was starting to soften. That evening, as Sarah served dinner, Jack surprised her by speaking first. "How's the city treating you?" he asked gruffly, cutting into his steak. Sarah blinked, caught off guard by the question. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "We lost our apartment and I couldn't find steady work. Coming here, it's been a blessing." Jack nodded thoughtfully, chewing slowly. "You're doing a good job, better than I expected." "Thank you," Sarah replied, smiling faintly. "I'm just glad we can help." They fell into an easy silence, broken only by the clinking of forks against plates. Lily, sensing the tension easing, piped up with another question. "Do you ever get lonely out here, Mr. Jack?" Jack froze, his fork hovering midway to his mouth. For a moment Sarah worried she'd overstepped, but then Jack chuckled softly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but the land keeps me company." "What about friends?" Lily pressed, undeterred. "Don't you have any?" Jack hesitated, his expression darkening. "Not really. Most folks around here are too busy with their own lives to bother with mine." "That's sad," Lily declared, crossing her arms. "Everyone needs friends." Sarah shot her daughter a warning glance, but Jack merely shrugged. "Life's not always fair, kid. You learn to deal with it." After dinner, Sarah tucked Lily into bed, reading her a story until her eyelids grew heavy. Once she was sure her daughter was asleep, Sarah returned to the kitchen to clean up. To her surprise, Jack was still there, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in hand. She's persistent, isn't she? He remarked, nodding toward the hallway where Lily slept. Sarah laughed softly. She gets that from me. I used to ask my parents a million questions when I was her age. Jack smiled faintly, his gaze drifting to the window. Kids are curious. It's good, I guess. Keeps them from getting stuck in their heads like adults do. Sarah paused, drying, her hands on a towel. Do you wish you had kids? The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Jack stiffened, his fingers tightening around the mug. For a moment, Sarah regretted asking, fearing she'd crossed a line. But then Jack exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing. Mary and I talked about it once, he said quietly, but things didn't work out the way we planned. I'm sorry, Sarah murmured, her heart aching for him. It must have been hard. It was, Jack admitted. But you learned to live with it. Or at least try to. They lapsed into silence, the weight of unspoken emotions filling the room. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the distant hoot of an owl. Sarah hesitated, unsure whether to press further or let the moment pass. Finally, she spoke. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. I wanted to understand. Jack looked at her then, his eyes searching hers. You're different from other people I've met, he said after a pause. Most folks wouldn't stick around, not with someone like me. Someone like you? Sarah echoed, raising an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? Jack chuckled, dryly. Stubborn, brooding, not exactly great company. You're not so bad, Sarah countered, surprising herself with her boldness. Once you stop scowling all the time anyway. To her delight, Jack laughed, a deep, genuine sound that transformed his face entirely. Careful, Sarah. Keep talking like that and I might start thinking you actually like me. Sarah grinned, feeling a flutter in her chest. Don't let it go to your head. Their banter continued late into the night, the conversation flowing more easily than either of them expected. They talked about everything and nothing, the challenges of ranch life, Sarah's dreams of opening her own bakery someday, and even Jack's favorite childhood memories. As the hours passed, the walls Jack had built around himself began to crumble, brick by brick, until he found himself sharing parts of his soul he hadn't dared to reveal in years. When they finally retired, for the night Sarah lay awake in bed, replaying their conversation in her mind. She hadn't intended to pry, but hearing Jack open up, even just a little, had touched her deeply. There was a vulnerability beneath his tough exterior, a longing for connection that mirrored her own. And though she knew better than to hope for anything more than friendship, she couldn't deny the growing bond between them. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of rain tapping gently against the window. The sky was gray and overcast, casting a somber mood over the ranch. Despite the dreary weather, Sarah set to work as usual, preparing pancakes and sausage for breakfast. Jack appeared just as she was setting the table, his boots caked with mud and his hat dripping water. Storm rolled in overnight, he announced, shaking droplets from his coat. Might be stuck inside today. Sarah glanced out the window, noting the puddles forming in the yard. Guess we'll have to make the best of it. As they ate, Lily bounced excitedly in her seat. Can we play games? Please? Jack raised an eyebrow. Games? Yes, Lily exclaimed. Like cards or checkers? Sarah stifled a laugh at Jack's bewildered expression. We could teach you, she offered, trying to suppress a grin. Jack groaned, though there was a hint of amusement in his voice. Fine, but don't expect me to go easy on you. After breakfast, they gathered around the table, where Sarah taught Jack and Lily how to play checkers. At first, Jack struggled to grasp the rules, his competitive streak flaring as Lily beat him repeatedly. But as the game progressed, he relaxed, laughing along with their playful teasing. For the first time in years, the house buzzed with laughter and chatter, the gloomy weather forgotten. By the time evening arrived, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch bathed in a soft, golden light. Sarah stood on the porch watching as Lily chased after a butterfly in the yard. Beside her, Jack leaned against the railing, his hat tipped back to reveal his face. She's a good kid, he said suddenly, his voice tinged with admiration. Reminds me of Mary in a way. Sarah turned to look at him, surprised by the tenderness in his tone. Thank you. That means a lot. Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. You've done a good job with her. Raising her on your own can't have been easy. It hasn't, Sarah admitted, but she's worth it. They stood there in companionable silence, the sun dipping low in the sky. In that moment, Sarah realized something important. Jack wasn't just tolerating their presence anymore. He was beginning to care, and maybe, just maybe, so was she. The days continued to grow colder as autumn gave way to winter, and the ranch transformed under a blanket of frost. The mornings were quiet, with thin wisps of steam rising from the barn as Jack tended to the animals. Sarah had taken to bundling, up in layers, her breath visible in the chilly air as she carried firewood inside or swept the porch free of fallen leaves. Despite the biting cold, there was a warmth spreading through the house that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just the crackling fire in the hearth. It was something deeper, an unspoken connection that had begun to form between them. Jack still kept his distance, but it was less about keeping people out and more about not wanting to ruin what they already had. He found himself looking forward to meals, not because he was hungry, but because he enjoyed the conversations that came with them. Sarah had a way of drawing him out, asking questions that made him think, or laugh, which was rarer still. Lily, too, had wormed her way into his heart, her endless curiosity and boundless energy reminding him of how life used to feel when Mary was around. One morning, as Sarah prepared breakfast, Jack walked into the kitchen carrying a basket of eggs. Thought you might need these, he said gruffly, setting the basket on the counter. Sarah turned, surprised by the gesture. Thank you. That's very thoughtful. It's nothing, Jack muttered, though the corners of his mouth twitched upward slightly. Figured I'd save you the trip. As she cracked the eggs into a bowl, Sarah glanced at him sideways. You've been doing that a lot lately. Thinking ahead. Don't read too much into it, Jack replied, shifting uncomfortably. Just trying to be helpful. But Sarah knew better. Over the past few weeks, Jack had started making small efforts to include them in his world. Whether it was bringing in firewood without being asked or teaching Lily how to identify different bird calls, he was slowly letting them in. And while he might try to downplay it, Sarah could see the change in him, the softening of his edges, the way he lingered just a little longer during meals or joined them on the porch after dinner. That evening, as they sat together by the fire, Lily curled up on the rug with a coloring book. Jack surprised them all by pulling out a deck of cards. How about another game? He suggested, shuffling awkwardly. Lily cheered, abandoning her crayons to climb onto the couch beside him. Yes, let's play Go Fish. Sarah laughed, watching as Jack struggled to explain the rules to Lily, who kept interrupting with excited guesses. I think we're going to have our hands full tonight, she teased. It's your fault for teaching her strategy games, Jack shot back, though there was no real bite to his words. By the end of the night, the room was filled with laughter, the kind that echoed off the walls and lingered long after the game ended. As Sarah tucked Lily into bed, she couldn't help but notice how content her daughter looked, her cheeks flushed with happiness. Did you have fun today? She asked softly. Lily nodded sleepily. Mr. Jack is nice. Do you think he likes us? Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. I think he does. When Sarah returned to the living room, Jack was still sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. She hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to join him or retreat to her room, but something about the way he sat, hunched over with his elbows on his knees, made her decide to stay. You're good with her, she said quietly, taking a seat across from him. Lily really looks up to you. Jack glanced at her, his expression unreadable. She's easy to like. Reminds me of someone I used to know. Mary? Sarah guessed gently. Jack nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. Yeah, she always had a way with kids. Used to dream about having a whole brood running around this place. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy, imagining the life Jack had lost. Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if things had gone differently? All the time, Jack admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But wondering doesn't change anything. You just learn to live with what you've got. Sarah leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. It must have been hard losing her. I can't imagine going through something like that. It was, Jack said, simply. For a while I didn't think I'd make it. Waking up every day felt like a chore. But then, you two showed up. He paused as if weighing his next words carefully. Things are different now. Better. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. We're glad to be here. This place has given us a second chance, too. They sat in silence for a while, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind howled softly, rattling the windows. But inside, the house felt warm and safe. For the first time since Mary's passing, Jack felt a sense of peace, a fragile, tentative thing, but one he was determined to hold on to. The next morning, Sarah woke to find Jack already outside, feeding the horses. She bundled up in her coat and scarf, stepping onto the porch to watch him work. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. The sight took her breath away, and for a moment, she forgot why she'd come outside. Beautiful, isn't it? Jack's voice startled her, and she turned to see him standing nearby holding a bucket of feed. It is, Sarah agreed, smiling faintly. I never realized how peaceful it could be out here. It has its moments, Jack replied, his tone lighter than usual, though most days it's just hard work. Well, maybe that's why it feels so special, Sarah said thoughtfully, because you put so much of yourself into it. Jack studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. You're full of surprises, you know that? I could say the same about you, Sarah countered, raising an eyebrow. They shared a smile, the kind that lingered longer than it should have. Then Jack cleared his throat, turning back to the horses. Guess I'd better finish up here. Breakfast won't cook itself. Speaking of which, Sarah called after him, I'm making pancakes. Don't be late. I wouldn't dare, Jack replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. Later, that day as Sarah kneaded dough for bread, Lily burst into the kitchen, her cheeks rosy from playing in the snow. Mommy, can we build a snowman? Please? Sarah glanced out the window where fat flakes drifted lazily from the sky. I don't see why not. Just bundle up, okay? Yes, Lily exclaimed, racing off to grab her coat. A few minutes. Later, Jack appeared in the doorway, his hat dusted with snow. What's all the excitement about? We're building a snowman, Lily announced proudly. You should help us. Jack hesitated, glancing at Sarah, who shrugged with a playful smirk. Why not? It'll give you a break from baking. With a reluctant sigh, Jack followed them outside, where Lily had already begun rolling a giant ball of snow. Together they worked to shape the body, stacking 3 uneven spheres and adding sticks for arms. Lily insisted on decorating it with stones for eyes and a carrot for a nose, giggling as Jack nearly toppled the entire structure, trying to adjust the head. There, Lily declared triumphantly, stepping back to admire their handiwork. Perfect. It's missing something, Jack said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out an old cowboy hat and placed it atop the snowman's head. Now it's perfect. Lily clapped her hands, delighted. He's the best snowman ever. As they stood there side by side, Sarah felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just the cold air tingling her skin. It was the realization that for the first time in years she felt truly happy. And judging by the look on Jack's face, she wasn't the only one. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she replayed the day's events in her mind. The laughter, the teamwork, the simple joy of creating something together. It was all so ordinary, yet it meant more than she could put into words. She knew Jack wasn't ready to let anyone fully into his heart. But maybe, just maybe, he was starting to let her in. The weeks leading up to Christmas brought a new kind of magic to the ranch. The air grew colder, and the mornings were crisp with frost that sparkled like diamonds under the pale sunlight. Sarah had taken it upon herself to decorate the house, hanging strands of garland along the fireplace mantel and taping paper snowflakes to the windows. She even managed to bake gingerbread cookies, their spicy aroma filling the rooms and adding a sense of warmth to the otherwise icy days. Jack watched these changes with a mix of amusement and disbelief. He hadn't celebrated Christmas properly since Mary's passing, preferring to let the holiday pass unnoticed. But this year was different. With Sarah and Lily around, there was no escaping the festive spirit they brought with them. Every corner of the house seemed to hum with life, and for the first time in years, Jack didn't mind. One afternoon, as Sarah hung stockings by the fireplace, Jack entered the living room carrying an armful of firewood. "You're really going all out, aren't you?" he remarked, setting the logs down beside the hearth. Sarah turned, brushing flour from her hands. "It's Christmas," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "Besides, Lily loves it." "That she does," Jack agreed, glancing toward the kitchen where Lily was busy cutting out star-shaped cookies. "She's been talking about Santa nonstop." "Well, maybe Santa will visit this year," Sarah teased, her eyes twinkling. "If we leave him some milk and cookies, of course." Jack chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd see the day when I'd have reindeer food on my porch." Despite his teasing tone, there was a softness in his voice, a hint of gratitude for the effort Sarah was putting into making the season special. It wasn't just about the decorations or the treats, it was about creating moments that felt meaningful. And Jack found himself wanting to be part of those moments more than he cared to admit. As Christmas Eve approached, Sarah decided to bake a pie for dessert, a rich golden pumpkin creation topped with whipped cream. She worked tirelessly in the kitchen, humming carols as she rolled out the dough and mixed the filling. Jack hovered nearby, pretending to inspect the stove, but secretly watching her every move. "You don't have to hang around here," Sarah said finally, catching him staring. "I'm sure there's plenty of work outside waiting for you." "There's always work," Jack replied, leaning against the counter. "But right now, I'd rather watch you cook." Sarah raised an eyebrow, surprised by the compliment. "Careful, Jack, keep talking like that and I'll start thinking you're sweet on me." To her surprise, Jack didn't brush off the comment with his usual gruffness. Instead, he smiled faintly, his gaze lingering on hers. "Maybe I am," he murmured, almost too quietly for her to hear. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The words hung between them, fragile yet undeniable. Sarah felt her cheeks flush and she quickly turned back to her pie, focusing on smoothing the crust to avoid meeting his eyes. Jack cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably, but the tension in the room wasn't awkward. It was charged with something deeper, something neither of them was ready to name. Later that evening, after dinner, they gathered around the tree Sarah had set up in the corner of the living room. It wasn't much, just a small pine Jack had cut down from the woods, but it was adorned with handmade ornaments and strings of colorful lights that flickered softly. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, her face glowing with excitement as she handed out presents wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "This one's for you, Mr. Jack?" she exclaimed, thrusting a lumpy package into his hands. Jack took it hesitantly, unwrapping it to reveal a knitted scarf in shades of red and blue. "Did you make this?" he asked, looking at Lily in astonishment. "Mommy helped," Lily admitted proudly. "Do you like it?" "I love it," Jack replied sincerely, draping the scarf around his neck. "Thank you." Sarah watched the exchange, her heart swelling with pride. She hadn't expected Jack to embrace their makeshift family traditions so readily, but here he was, laughing and smiling alongside them as if he'd done it all his life. It was a side of him she hadn't seen before, one that was tender and genuine, unburdened by the walls he'd built around himself. When it was Jack's turn to give gifts, he reached beneath the tree and pulled out two carefully wrapped packages. Handing one to Sarah and the other to Lily, he waited anxiously as they tore open the paper. Inside, Lily found a wooden toy horse carved with intricate detail, its mane painted white. Her eyes widened with delight. and she hugged the toy tightly to her chest. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, holding up the second gift, a delicate locket engraved with flowers. "Jack, this is incredible. I figured it was time someone gave you something nice," Jack muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "You deserve it." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Really, thank you." They spent the rest of the evening exchanging stories and singing. Carols, the fire crackling in the background as laughter filled the room. When Lily finally drifted off to sleep, curled up on the couch with her new horse clutched in her arms, Sarah and Jack remained by the fire, sipping hot cocoa and sharing quiet conversation. "You've changed this place," Jack said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Made it feel like home again." Sarah smiled softly, staring into the flames. "We've changed each other, I think." Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I never planned on feeling this way. Not after Mary. But you and Lily, you've brought something back that I thought was gone forever." Sarah reached over, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "We didn't plan on it either. But sometimes, life gives us gifts we don't expect." Jack looked at her then, his eyes searching hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of unspoken feelings hanging heavy in the air. Then, slowly, Jack leaned forward, his lips brushing against hers in a tentative kiss. It was soft and fleeting, but it carried a promise, a beginning. When they pulled apart, Sarah's cheeks were flushed and Jack's heart raced in his chest. "Merry Christmas," he said hoarsely, his voice barely above a whisper. "Merry Christmas," Sarah replied, her smile lighting up the room. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the promise of snow. But inside, the ranch was warm and alive, filled with the sound of laughter and the glow of shared happiness. For the first time in years, both Sarah and Jack allowed themselves to hope, not just for the future, but for each other. The days following Christmas felt different, as if the entire ranch had been touched by a quiet transformation. The frost on the ground sparkled brighter, the wind carried a gentler hum, and even Jack's usual gruffness seemed to soften further. He no longer kept his distance during meals or retreated to the barn as soon as the dishes were cleared. Instead, he lingered, finding excuses to stay close, whether it was helping Sarah chop firewood or teaching Lily how to braid horsehair into bracelets. It wasn't just routine anymore. It was connection. Sarah noticed the change too, though. She didn't say anything aloud. She saw the way Jack smiled more often now, the corners of his eyes crinkling when Lily giggled or when Sarah teased him about his scarf. She also noticed how he'd begun to seek her out, not in an obvious way but through small gestures. A cup of coffee left on the counter for her before she woke up, an extra blanket draped over her chair on chilly evenings. These little acts of kindness spoke louder than words ever could. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Sarah decided to broach a subject that had been weighing on her mind. "Jack," she began hesitantly, her fingers twisting the edge of her sweater. "What happens next, with us, I mean?" Jack stiffened slightly, his gaze fixed on the flames. For a moment, Sarah thought he might ignore the question altogether, but then he sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "I've been thinking about that too," he admitted. "I never planned on letting anyone in again. But you and Lily, you've made me realize I don't have to do this alone." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to remain calm. "And what do you want?" "I want—" Jack paused, searching for the right words. "I want to try. If you're willing." Tears pricked at the corners of Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them away, nodding slowly. "We're willing," she said softly, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions inside her. "But it won't be easy. You know that, right? No," Jack replied, his tone serious. "Nothing worth having ever is, but I'm tired of running from my feelings, tired of pretending I don't care." They sat in silence for a while, the crackling fire filling the space between them. Outside, the snow fell gently, blanketing the world in white. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in Sarah's mind. Yet, beneath the uncertainty, there was hope. Hope that they could build something new, something strong enough to withstand whatever challenges lay ahead. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the sun reflecting off the fresh snow like 1,000 tiny diamonds. Lily bounded into the kitchen, her cheeks pink from the cold, holding a handful of icicles she'd collected outside. "Look what I found," she exclaimed, holding them up proudly. Sarah laughed, taking one of the icicles from her daughter's hand. "Those are beautiful, sweetheart. Just don't eat them, they're not candy." Lily giggled, skipping over to where Jack stood by the stove, sipping his morning coffee. "Mr. Jack, can we ride the horses today?" Jack glanced at Sarah, who shrugged with a playful smirk. "It's your call," she said lightly. "All right," Jack relented, setting his mug down. "But only if you promise to stay close and listen to everything I tell you." "Yes," Lily cheered, throwing her arms around his waist in excitement. "Thank you." As they prepared the horses, Sarah watched from the porch, marveling at how natural it all felt. Jack lifted Lily onto the saddle, adjusting the stirrups and showing her how to hold the reins. His patience was remarkable, his voice gentle as he guided her through each step. When Lily finally took off at a slow trot, her laughter echoing across the field, Sarah couldn't help but smile. "You're good with her," she said later, when they returned to the house. "She adores you." "She makes it easy," Jack replied, brushing snow off his coat. "She reminds me of Mary, in a way. That same spirit." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight behind his words. "Do you think Mary would approve of this?" she asked cautiously, gesturing between them. Jack hesitated, his expression thoughtful. "I think she'd want me to be happy. And for the first time in years, I feel like I am." Their relationship continued to grow in the weeks that followed, becoming less tentative and more certain. They shared meals together, worked side by side, and spent evenings talking about their dreams for the future. Sarah confided in Jack about her desire to open a bakery someday, and Jack listened intently, offering suggestions about possible locations in town. In return, Jack opened up about his fears, about failing as a husband and father, about losing someone he loved again. But Sarah reassured him, reminding him that love always came with risks. Lily thrived in the new dynamic, treating Jack like a second father. She followed him everywhere, peppering him with questions and begging for stories about life on the ranch. Jack indulged her curiosity, sharing tales of wild storms and runaway cattle, each story bringing them closer together. One afternoon, as Sarah baked bread in the kitchen, Jack appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "Can I talk to you? For a minute?" he asked, his voice unusually nervous. "Of course," Sarah replied, wiping her hands on a towel. "What is it?" Jack took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "I've been thinking about making this official, about asking you to stay for good." Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Stay?" "As my wife," Jack clarified, his cheeks flushing slightly. "If you'll have me." For a long moment, Sarah simply stared at him, overwhelmed by the enormity of the question. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I will." Jack exhaled sharply, relief washing over him as he pulled her into his arms. "Thank you," he murmured, holding her tightly. "You won't regret this." "I already know I won't," Sarah replied, resting her head against his chest. "We're going to make this work. Together." When Lily returned from playing outside, they broke the news to her, expecting her to cheer or jump with excitement. Instead, she looked at them solemnly, her brow furrowed. "Does this mean Mr. Jack is going to be my daddy now?" Jack knelt down beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Only if you want me to be," he said gently. "I promise I'll do my best to be a good one." Lily considered this for a moment, then threw her arms around his neck. "Okay," she said simply. "But you have to teach me how to ride better." Jack chuckled, hugging her close. "Deal." As the winter melted into spring, the ranch blossomed with new life. Wildflowers dotted the fields, calves frolicked in the pastures, and the air buzzed with the sound of birds returning from their migration. Inside the house, plans were underway for a simple wedding, a ceremony under the old oak tree surrounded by friends and neighbors who had come to care for Sarah and Lily as much as Jack did. On the day of the wedding, Sarah stood by the window, smoothing the fabric of her dress as Lily adjusted the flowers in her hair. "Are you ready?" she asked, turning to her daughter. Lily nodded, clutching her bouquet tightly. "Are you?" Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "More than I've ever been." Outside, Jack waited beneath the oak tree, his hat in his hands and his heart racing. As Sarah walked toward him accompanied by Lily, he felt a surge of gratitude for the woman who had brought light back into his life, for the child who had reminded him how to dream, and for the land that had always been his home. When the ceremony ended, they celebrated with music, laughter, and plates of food Sarah had spent days preparing. The ranch had never felt so alive, so full of joy. And as Jack danced with Sarah under the stars, holding her close as the fireflies flickered around them, he knew they had found something rare and precious. A second chance at love, built on trust, patience, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow.